More breaking news on this Friday afternoon. Back to this, wiretap story, new developments in the president's wiretap claims. It's become this international incident, as we've outlined for you. But let's go straight to the State Department now, to Michelle Kosinski, who's got some new information here on these discussions, or was it an apology? What happened between the U.S. and the White House and England?
Well, a British government official is saying that there were two conversations that happened yesterday. One was between the national security advisors of both countries. That was a phone call placed to the White House, and the discussion took place. But then there was also a face-to-face conversation between White House spokesman Sean Spicer and the UK ambassador to the US, Kim Darroch. They met up at the White House St. Patrick's Day event, had a serious discussion there. It's unclear whether this was pre-planned or they just happened to be there and bump into each other. It sounds like the latter was the case, but that's where they had this discussion. And we know that these discussions between both of the parties were not pleasant. These were serious discussions. They were not very cordial. In fact, when I was talking to a British government official about, well, did this get heated? Was this something that needed to be discussed at length? They pointed to the fact that the British GCHQ, the intelligence services that focuses on signals intelligence and wiretapping, rarely, if ever, says anything publicly. I mean, usually their kinds of responses that they give are, we're not confirming or denying the matter. The fact that they stepped out and issued a public statement about these claims, calling them nonsense, says it all. And the government official said, well, you can draw your conclusions from that as to how these conversations went. The content, though, people that I've been talking to have been really hesitant to get into that. They want to make sure that, this is a close relationship between the U.S. and the U.K., obviously, and they want to maintain the ability for them to have private discussions. So nobody really wants to give much detail as to what went on in these conversations, and even as to whether this was an apology or not. We've been hearing different things from different sources, but one government official on the British side that I talked to wouldn't really characterize it as to whether it was a formal apology, as some in the British press are reporting that it was.
Okay. Michelle Kosinski with the news. Let's analyze some of this. I've got David Andelman standing by, editor emeritus of the World Policy Journal and a regular contributor to CNN.com's opinion page. Also with us, CNN Global Affairs analyst Aaron David Miller, vice president and distinguished scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center. Gentlemen, great to have both of you on here on this Friday. And David, let me just begin with you on the news that Michelle was just reporting, this back and forth between England and the White House over what Sean Spicer had alluded to at the briefing yesterday, all over, the wiretap allegations. This has become this incident now that traces to Britain.
It does, and remember, Britain is supposed to be really our best friend in Europe, especially Brexit Britain, post-Brexit Britain. Theresa May and Trump had a wonderful conversation when she came to Washington. She was the first European leader to come to Washington to pay her respects to Trump. And now, all of a sudden, this country with really the greatest long-term relationship, the comedy of the English-speaking world all together. Now, all of a sudden, we're having a huge problem with the Brits. This is not a good thing to have. And imagine coming on the same day when the European leader who Trump really made the greatest fun of during the entire campaign, this woman, she was a great leader, but she's basically thrown her country away to the immigrants and the refugees and so on. On this day when he should have one country in Europe that he really can get along very well with, all of a sudden, what happens? Now what happens, for instance, there's been a parliamentary debate over whether to rescind the invitation by the Queen for Trump to come and visit her on a state visit to England. It will be very interesting to see how this plays out.
That's right, or even downgrade it from the pomp and circumstance and the red carpet. Aaron, what do you think of all of this?
America first is fine, Brooke, but it can't be America only. And if the president wants to make America great again, he's going to have to depend on American allies and partners. And what I saw today in the press conference with Angela Merkel were two takeaways for me. Number one, clearly that relationship isn't going terribly well. It could have been a train wreck, but I suspect since diplomacy is the get-along business, they contain the differences that they had. But in the same frame, you saw that sort of awkward interaction between Angela Merkel and Mr. Trump, and you also saw an opportunity missed, I think, by the president to basically reach out to the Brits. And while this incident will pass with the Brits, it seems to me that it's going to require, I think, a personal conversation between the president and the prime minister. We cannot take this ally, or frankly any of our allies, for granted.
At least she did say, Chancellor Merkel did say, at least it's finally nice to be able to talk to you and not about you, you know, alluding to so many of the highlight or the low light reel, however you want to characterize it, from what, you know, then candidate and nominee Trump had said about Angela Merkel. David, to you, you know, we walked through all the wiretap headlines from that back and forth and that final question. What about NATO? What about the fact that Chancellor Merkel finally acknowledged, you know, Mr. Trump's whole thing has been everyone needs to pay their fair share, 2% of GDP. She finally said, okay, yes, we'll do that by 2024.
Right, exactly. And what I found really interesting was that she did seem to go 2/3 of the way towards Trump. In other words, she really tried to make nice to Trump. This was really, not only on NATO. NATO was a very important issue, but she did say, we're going to get there. You know, just be patient. What is really important is that we are a reliable ally, and that NATO and all of its members are reliable allies. And basically, this is what her defense minister has said in the past, that America, calm down, Trump, calm down. We are reliable allies no matter how much money we put in, and we will put in more money. And trade is the other key issue, I think. Christiane Amanpour earlier on CNN today pointed out quite correctly, I thought, that this was a headline coming out of this meeting, and namely that Merkel, for the first time, noted, if you like bilateral trade agreements, you, Mr. Trump. So guess what? We are a bilateral trade agreement. We and Europe, we are a single unitary nation. So negotiate with us. So she tried to find ways that they can actually find a way to meet in the middle somehow. And I think hopefully this may have sunk in to Trump as an important going forward motion.
So many foreign policy experts saying this is the most important meeting he has had thus far. David and Aaron, thank you both so much.